Hi, welcome to part one of this Grand Canyon painting tutorial, or just a really hard landscape tutorial. So I started out with this background with just two mid-tone colors, the red and the blue, to try to simplify where the shadows were and where the lights were and make it less difficult for myself because it was already going to be a complicated piece. But as it turned out, this still was really difficult, and this first part was really, I really struggled with it because I really didn't know what I was doing at first. I was just trying to follow the reference, which is always a good place to start when you don't know what you're doing, is just following the reference. But I soon learned that following it too closely actually made it more difficult for me to flow with my painting, and I felt really stuck a couple different times. This is a really slow process of me trying to figure out what goes where, what colors should go where, how do I match the scene with the colors, and I just really struggled. But that's okay. It was a really big challenge for me and a difficult landscape to encounter. So it was something new that I've never done before. As you can see, I'm painting a rock right now. I'm going in, just making subtle indications that this is not a flat surface. And then this is the part where I start to get a little confused about my shadow colors. I make things a little too dark here, and I'm just trying to create like contrast with the light and the dark, and underneath that rock it's a little bit of a darker valley. But overall, after I do this first run of my Grand Canyon landscape, I get better in the next part, which is awesome. So sometimes you really need to just go for it and try it out and make mistakes, and then you learn and you do better in the following. So I made the mistake of doing just straight up pigment, like a blue pigment for the shadow right here. That's why it's super dark. I should have just left those lighter blues as the shadows, but I later go back and try to fix it with brown. As you can see, I'm trying to go over it because the blue's just not working, this really dark blue. So I try to go back, and in the end I end up using brown in this section, this part one, to fill in my shadow sections, even though in the photo reference, all the shadows in the landscape are the ones that are further away are a blue color. They are a light blue, and this tends to happen when you're painting landscapes or when you're looking at a landscape. What you think the colors are supposed to be of the earth are not actually the colors that you see. A lot of the times, at certain times of the day, a landscape like a mountain can be purple, it can be pink, the shadows can be blue or violet. And that's what I later depict. Later on, I also start to try to fill in the background with a more violety purple color, because the blue just seemed like it wasn't working with my landscape. And even though it was blue in the photo, I didn't want to make it too confusing. Like it was just too much with what I had going on already. As you can see, I'm trying to like fill in the details. The problem with this first take, and what I later realized, is I tried so hard to, make it just like the reference photo, and it was too detailed, and I really should have simplified this more. So in the second take, I really simplify what I am painting, because the hardest part about trying to recreate something this detailed is trying to make it super detailed when it's a really tiny canvas. And the smaller you go, the less detailed you have to be, which is the whole point of why I picked a small canvas in the first place, because if anybody was going to see the mistakes, it was going to be difficult because it was going to be really tiny, right? So I picked that canvas for that reason. Yet the background I chose is really expansive. These details in the photo are really large in real life. So it's really hard to compare with that and try to put that all into focus in one painting. And as you go back further in the landscape towards that horizon line, as I've said multiple times, the details get less prominent. So I try to play up the color in the front, and then in the back I tried to kind of loosen it up, loosen it up and just let it free flow, make it less dark, but or less pigmented, less saturated. So now I zoomed in a little more, but the right side I really enjoyed. The left side was so hard. It was just crazy hard, but the right side I'm just blocking in the color here. This first part is all really one shade, and I later add more details, but for now I'm just trying to stick within the lines that I've created with the shadow and follow the reference photo overall. Adding more of the lighter colors. The problem with this landscape is it had a lot of different colors, and you're trying to make it an even composition where you're trying to make everything look like it's a part of one cohesive piece. Because in real life, that's what Earth looks like. It looks like one cohesive shade, tone. So even though you have a bunch of different colors, simplify it by trying to make them all the same, relatively the same color of light, right? Whatever the lighting is, typically that's how you create cohesion, is by making them all the same shade range, the same tone range, right? So not making them too contrasting, like those darks are way too dark for the lights that are going on in this painting. They all need to be in a more cohesive way. So now I'm just going in. I'm using two different lighter tones. I'm using a more green one and a more warmer, lighter tone for the sandy looking part of the Grand Canyon. And I'm just trying to fill in and create contrast with the rock formations, because there's a lot of different structures going on in this painting. And I take my time. So when you're doing this, really take your time, because that's the only way you're gonna not go crazy, I feel, when you're painting something like this. Even though at the end of it, my head hurt. I was done. The first pass was really a struggle for me, as I said. So now I'm going in, I'm trying to fill in some of these lines with the shades that I saw within the reference photo, trying to create some hilly looking formations right there, some contrast. So it's not a flat picture. That's the thing. You're trying to create depth when you're painting a scene like this, because in real life, this already has depth. This is three-dimensional, right? And you're trying to create 3D on a 2D landscape. So the question is, how do you do that? You can do that. You can create depth by various colors that are really subtle, right? You can create a lot of subtle depth with similar tones, as I was using with the green and with the white looking color, right? And then with the red, they're all in the same shade range. They're all very light. So I can create a lot of depth with that. And then later on, adding on the shadows really create the depth, and then the highlight. So it's all the shifts of light in the photo that create the depth, that create the textures that are going on in this photo. I'm trying to create, the shapes of what these formations look like. This is starting to get to the part where I start to add on the brown shades for the shadow sections of the painting, which really were a blue color, which I go back in part 2 of this video and fix up everything that I made a mistake in the first pass, which is totally fine. The hardest part, the thing I struggled with the most, was the shadows. The shadows is something you typically want to put down first, but it was the one that I really struggled with going into this painting because it was hard to create the realistic look of the shadow without making it too out there and not look good with the painting. I also, what you'll see me do throughout this painting is if I see a color, if I'm using a color and I see it elsewhere, I'll try to fill it in wherever else I see it in this painting. So using that green, I went all over with it. Using the little wider color, I go all over with it. The red color, I'm trying to fill in this a darker red, a more brighter, vibrant red in the front because that's what it looked like in the reference photo. And it was one of my favorite parts is that right corner is just so vibrant. It's so pretty, not a whole lot of crazy going on or like too much detail. So I really enjoyed using the vibrant colors in the front, which I later realized I could add a little bit to the back. I just wanted to create the depth of the photo by toning down the colors as you got farther into it, so it made it more realistic. But I do try to use a few different shades in the background. I think that's what it is. Foreground means up front, background means in the back. So I'm trying to stick with the reference, but also not overcomplicate the back, as you can see. Putting all those colors I see all over. At one point, I try to use a lighter red, the red that's already on the canvas, and I was like, wait, it's not showing up because it's the same color. I thought I had changed it, but I hadn't. So you might see that. So when you're painting a complicated landscape like this, you really want to make sure that you have the drawing down. My drawing was pretty good, but like as I got farther into the background, I kind of lost some of my background and I got confused. So I started making shit up. So if you ever get confused and you know how the landscape forms, you know what kind of shapes are going on, you can kind of just make shit up at that point. Because it's too late to really go back in and try to draw or correct the painting. So you kind of just get to add your own flair at that point. But the first part, making your drawing. The second part is trying to make it simple on yourself by starting out with that basic, only go with like 2 tones, mid-tones, colors. So I went with the blue and the reddish orange color as my simplified, first like layer of the background. And then going in, and I made the mistake of trying to follow exactly the reference photo. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you don't know what you're doing at first, which, as I said, I've never painted the Grand Canyon. I really didn't know what I was doing, even though I've painted many landscapes, but it's always new when you're painting a new landscape, right? So what you can do instead of following it, detail per detail, trying to get every little color, every little shade within this, I say make it easy on yourself and only just stick to 1 or 2 or 3 colors to start off with. Like, make it super easy on yourself. Do your mid-tone, do your highlight, do your shadow, right? And then add on the details later. And that might make your process a whole lot easier than than mine. And you can even do that for section. Like, say this right corner has different colors in it than the rest of the background, right? So I would stick with just those basic three for the right corner, and then do a different basic three mid-tone highlight and shadow for the whatever other sections had the same colors in it. So I think that would be a good way to simplify the painting for you, so you're not trying to add every little nuance into it right away, blending everything out. Just try to block in the easiest colors you can, that you see the most, and then later go back in and add your detail, add your, the shift for the depth, like later add more depth to it. So yeah, now I'm just trying to continue going back in, going all lower wherever I find this color, which, as I said, it's great. If you see a color, put it everywhere, wherever it is in your reference photo. But at the same time, that's how I really started to get confused on what was what, especially on that top left side. That was a real struggle for me. The right side was a little more simplified, but the left side had a little more detail and like a lot of different colors that were all in one place. So that's why it was a little bit harder to do. Because the line structure of the Grand Canyon has a bunch of rocks that are horizontal, like a bunch of, that's which designates the different levels and the different heights and stuff like that. And then it has a lot of vertical lines too going down it. So it was a lot of cross hatching is what it's called when it's like vertical against horizontal. But if you ever take a look at the Grand Canyon, it does have a lot of those rock formations that are very layered horizontally, very layered, cut out. It looks like somebody like sculpted it, like they just cut out this rock layer by layer. And then like you see the horizontal parts of how it's defined, the rock's like it's a vertical thing. It has height, so you're trying to define that height as well as define the little planes within it. As you can see, I'm going in with that violet right now. I said I would do it. I was like, this blue is not working. I need to go in with the violet, tone it down a bit. So I tried toning it down to make it a more cohesive picture, painting, whatever you want to call it. And it works for this first part. So although I didn't know what I was doing, I say that for this first pass, I did a pretty good job of trying to get everything in there, no matter how long it took me. I overall wasn't satisfied, but I wasn't done, So anyways, that concludes part 1. See you in part 2.